Before we begin this deep dive, we do need to issue a clear disclaimer. The material we are covering today deals explicitly with adult-oriented businesses, sexualized labor, human trafficking, and some very serious financial crime.
So listener discretion is strongly advised, as some of this content may not be suitable for everyone.
Welcome back to the deep dive. I have to admit, I'm still processing the last few weeks.
Aren't we all? It's been an intense period of learning, especially after our confidential sit-down.
Exactly. I just keep thinking back to that evening at Sugar Palm. You know, just sitting there listening to Gia, Omi, and Minx, the DLB circle,
Right.
talking so frankly about, the origins of their new podcast, Hustle, Hustled, Hustling in the Neon.
Yeah.
It was a privilege, definitely. But honestly, it was also a real education in vulnerability.
It was, and I think you went into that conversation admiring the hustle, right? The fierce independence, the financial control they managed to get.
They did.
And you came out, I think, a little shaken by the systemic vulnerability of it all.
Totally shaken. I had always admired the choice, the agency, this idea that they were building their own financial empire on their own terms. But then you hear their actual accounts of survival, the constant negotiation of safety, the way the entire system is, it feels like it's fundamentally designed to keep them just barely protected enough to keep working. It changes everything.
It does.
It's no longer some abstract economic choice. It's often an economic requirement that they have to navigate under immense duress.
And that's the crucial reframing we need for today.
Yeah.
We have to move beyond the moral judgment and, the spectacle, that personal connection, really understanding the labor and the life behind the neon sign. That's what allows us to approach this massive, complex industry with the gravity it actually deserves.
Because what we're diving into today, it isn't just about individual choices. It's about the entire economic machine that surrounds sexualized labor. And it ranges from, corporate boardrooms managing multi-million-dollar publicly traded companies all the way down to the clandestine, violent world of human trafficking and organized crime.
So our mission today is a really in-depth exploration of this whole ecosystem. We've pulled together a fascinating set of sources, government risk assessments like the U.S. Treasury's National Money Laundering Risk Assessment, city zoning and planning documents from places like New Orleans and Dallas.
On corporate financial filings, too, right?
Exactly, from giants like RCI Hospitality. And then we have these incredible first-hand accounts and academic research on exotic dance, and, of course, the whole digital world of platforms like OnlyFans.
So I guess the core question we're really trying to answer is critical for understanding modern commerce itself. How do these three distinct worlds, the regulated publicly traded corporation, the precarious digital gig economy, and the, hyper-criminalized exploitative underground, how do they all intersect and thrive within the exact same economic and regulatory sphere?
Let's unpack that intersection.
Okay, let's start with the least criminalized, most publicly sanitized end of the spectrum, the restaurant business model.
Right.
This is the world of high-volume, theme-based dining that trades heavily on sexualized labor without, officially entering the sphere of adult entertainment. We're talking about places like Twin Peaks and Ojos Locos Sports Cantina.
And these chains, they operate very firmly in what the industry calls the eatertainment category. The product isn't just the food or the beer, it's the atmosphere, the high-energy theme, and, critically, the staff.
The staff is the theme.
The staff is the theme. Twin Peaks, for instance, is notorious for its servers earning what the sources describe as amazing tips. The whole business model is built around driving high volume through a very specific kind of labor presentation.
And Ojos Locos seems to have completely cornered a major market segment within that category.
Ojos Locos is particularly strategic. It is the largest sports bar chain in the U.S., specifically targeting the growing Hispanic customer base.
So they're tailoring the entire experience.
The entire experience. Sports are broadcast in Spanish, they offer Latin-based cuisine, and the servers wear lingerie, providing a spicy twist, as the sources put it.
Right.
This specialized appeal allows them to just dominate their markets. They operate 27 restaurants across Texas, Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona.
The scale is pretty impressive. And to give a sense of just how mainstream this model has become, you mentioned one of their locations even took over a former casino.
That's right. One of the Ojos Locos locations in North Vegas actually replaced the Lucky Club Hotel and Casino. And that shift from a traditional gambling establishment to a themed, sexually charged sports bar, it really shows how seamlessly this niche has integrated into major entertainment hubs. It's even replacing older forms of entertainment.
This model, though, it operates on a legal tightrope. Which brings us to the thorny issue of appearance-based hiring and anti-discrimination law. I mean, how do these companies justify hiring exclusively or, predominantly young, attractive women without running afoul of gender discrimination laws?
They rely on one of the narrowest loopholes in employment law, the bona fide occupational qualification, or BFOQ.
BFOQ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A BFOQ is a legitimate defense against discrimination, but only if the characteristic, in this case sex or a specific appearance, is essential to the business's continued participation in a certain market.
So the argument isn't women are better servers. It has to be something more like the whole theme of our sports bar requires female staff wearing these specific uniforms.
Precisely. And the courts are highly skeptical of BFOQ claims because they understand how easily they can be used to just mask discriminatory practices.
I bet.
They rarely uphold gender discrimination unless the characteristic is utterly indispensable. For a place like Hooters, the legal strategy is to argue that the Hooters girl is the brand.
So the female-only staff is the theme.
It is the theme, making it integral to the dining experience they are selling. They claim they are selling that theme, not just the food.
And that legal tightrope has been tested,
Yeah.
right? Even if they often win on the gender issue, they can't discriminate on other factors.
No, absolutely not. We saw that in the 2022 case involving the EEOC and Hooters. That case targeted discrimination based on race and color.
And what happened?
The successful enforcement resulted in a $250,000 consent decree.
So what was the real takeaway from that? What did it change?
The key was the prohibition on using subjective standards based on race or color when making employment decisions, specifically around layoffs or recalls. It tells us that even if these restaurants can legally argue that their gender requirements are essential to their theme, they must still adhere to strict, non-discriminatory standards concerning race, color, and other protected classes.
So it forces them to professionalize their HR, even in a business that's centered on something so subjective.
Exactly.
Okay, let's turn up the volume a notch and move from restaurants to the corporate scale of explicit adult entertainment. This transition takes us to companies like RCI Hospitality Holdings, Inc.
Right.
And this is where the sheer corporate ambition in this space really, really hits home.
RCI is the definition of a corporate giant in adult entertainment. They are a holding company, publicly traded on the NASDAQ, with interests that span live adult entertainment venues and also high-quality dining, like their separate Bombshells venture. They are fully transparent about their operations, incorporated in Texas since 1994, and they're constantly growing.
How does their financial footprint compare to the general perception of the industry being, small and decentralized?
Oh, it shatters that perception. As of September 2023, RCI operated 69 establishments across 13 states. Their financials are massive. In fiscal year 2022, they reported over $113 million in total sales of alcoholic beverages. Alone.
Wait, just alcohol?
Just alcohol.
Yes.
Service revenues added another $93.8 million on top of that.
Wow.
And they are aggressively expansionary. They acquired 15 clubs in 2022 for a total investment of $134.2 million. This is a multi-state, multi-million-dollar enterprise, and they're appealing directly to institutional investors.
That raises a critical point about the investor pitch then. Why is the market willing to invest such huge sums in an industry with extremely high regulatory risk, constant local political battles, and, inherent societal stigma?
That's the core insight here. The investor pitch relies on two things: incredible cash flow and mastery of the regulatory environment.
Okay.
So while adult entertainment clubs face high regulatory risk zoning, liquor licenses, and all sorts of restrictions, RCI demonstrates they know how to navigate these challenges at scale. They understand that while their expression, the dance, is protected by the First Amendment, the conduct of the entertainers is not. They are selling high margins and high volume in venues that are locally restricted, which actually limits competition.
But the single biggest driver of that profit margin, the real corporate engine, it has to be the independent contractor status of their labor force. This feels like the great loophole of the entire industry.
It is the primary engine. In U.S. strip clubs, dancers are overwhelmingly classified as independent contractors.
And what does that mean financially?
It means that RCI and similar corporations gain an immediate, immense advantage. They pay zero payroll taxes, zero unemployment insurance, zero healthcare benefits, and they aren't subject to minimum wage laws for the dancers. All the labor risk is transferred directly to the individual worker.
It's worse than just not paying a wage, though. The workers actually have to pay the company for the privilege of working there.
That's the truly exploitative mechanism. Dancers are required to pay a house fee or stage fee to the club for every single shift they work. If they secure a lucrative private dance, the club takes a guaranteed percentage of that fee before the dancer ever sees a dime.
And then there's the tip out.
Yes, the customary and often mandatory tip out. The dancer's remaining income, which is derived entirely from customer tips, must then be split with the entire ecosystem of supporting staff. The DJs, the bartenders, the bouncers, the house moms.
So the dancer is essentially acting as a micro-business that funds the wages and operations of the staff employed directly by the corporation.
All while paying the corporation rent the house fee for the workspace.
So a publicly traded company uses a classification loophole to enforce high levels of control over its workforce, dictating their appearance, their schedules, their conduct, while simultaneously classifying them as contractors to strip them of all basic labor protections and force them to pay the company and its employees out of their own tips.
That is the highly efficient and highly precarious economic reality. It's why the fight over classifying dancers as employees under the Federal Labor Standards Act is so critical. That single change would fundamentally reshape the profitability and risk structure of this entire corporate sector.
So now we have to shift our perspective entirely and focus on the individuals who are operating within this precarious economic framework. It's so crucial to understand the motivations behind exotic dance. It's often framed as this hedonistic choice, but the reality is just so much more grounded in survival.
Absolutely. The research confirms that the overwhelming driver is economic necessity. Yet, within that necessity, dancers identify real, transferable professional benefits.
Like what?
They value the flexible schedule, which allows them to pursue education or care for dependents. They gain immediate financial independence. They develop negotiation skills that would benefit anyone in any profession. And they rely on a strong sense of peer support, which helps them navigate the dangers of the environment.
The sources are really clear that for most, this is a temporary, highly targeted means to achieve a specific goal, whether that's funding college, saving for a down payment, or just escaping poverty.
Correct. It's a calculated risk and a pragmatic financial strategy. And essential to maintaining their sanity and self-respect is the ability to maintain clear, firm boundaries between the work persona and their intimate personal life.
It's a job.
They treat the club like any other job, don't confuse a performance with the person, and definitely don't ask for freebies.
But the environment they have to navigate to earn this money is incredibly dangerous, despite the corporate setting.
The physical and emotional risks are constant. Dancers report endemic sexual harassment. The environment itself is often neither crime-free nor physically safe. Sources highlight the physical costs, the pain and embarrassment of slipping on the pole, where one dancer said the thump was loud. It's highly physical, demanding labor.
They use the club's rules and security features to their advantage, though, right? To manage some of those risks.
They have to. They are skilled risk managers. When customers get out of hand, dancers rely on club rules and, crucially, the presence of security cameras to enforce boundaries and summon staff.
I saw some strange extremes of that in the research.
We saw that too. One source mentioned a dancer who made great money by beating dudes in VIP, which were consensual spankings that were apparently allowed within that club's specific conduct rules. They learn exactly which boundaries they can enforce and which ones they must concede.
This intense physical and emotional labor, combined with the lack of labor protection, is then compounded by the devastating societal judgment they face. Which I guess brings us to the concept of the hierarchy.
The hierarchy. It's a sociological term, and it describes the stigma hierarchy that's imposed both by society and sometimes internally within the sex worker community itself.
So it's a mechanism for assigning worth.
It's a mechanism for assigning relative worth and respect based on proximity to explicit sexual contact, perceived victimization, and criminality.
And where does exotic dancing sit in that hierarchy?
They are usually placed higher up. Street-based sex workers who face the highest risk of violence and criminalization are placed at the very bottom. Exotic dancers, whose work involves a level of expression and is sometimes protected by the First Amendment, often sit near the top. They receive less acute stigma than, say, escorts or street workers, but still face significant social isolation.
And the attempts to maintain this distinction, to be seen as professional and separate, are really efforts to mitigate the real-world harms of that stigma, particularly when it comes to essential services.
Precisely. The stigma has devastating impacts on their health and stability. Sex workers report experiencing widespread discrimination, which advocacy groups often term whorephobia, particularly when seeking medical or mental health care.
How does that discrimination actually manifest in a clinical setting?
It's pervasive and it's damaging. Mental health professionals who are ethically bound to be non-judgmental often fail. They might turn away sex worker patients or, worse, attribute all mental health issues, from depression to anxiety, solely to the sex work itself.
Wow.
They'll demand the patient quit their job as a precondition for therapy, regardless of the patient's financial reality or whether the job is actually the central issue.
So instead of treating the person, they treat the profession as the pathology.
Exactly, and medical providers follow suit. Sex workers often delay or entirely avoid preventative care because they fear being judged, questioned about drug-seeking behavior, or having their occupation flagged in a way that could compromise their housing or custody situations. This constant fear of judgment undermines basic human rights and leads to worse health outcomes across the board.
This overwhelming precarity and stigma, it naturally accelerates the industry's shift toward the perceived safety and autonomy of digital platforms.
Right.
The rise of OnlyFans, especially accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, is a perfect case study in platformization.
It fundamentally changed the landscape. When physical clubs were shut down, many dancers transitioned online. The perceived benefits were immediate: control over content, control over pricing, and physical safety. Sources indicate that many creators reported increased self-confidence and self-advocacy because they were now in charge of their own brand.
The media narrative, however, is so heavily focused on the few whales, the superstars making millions. This totally distorts the financial reality for the average creator, doesn't it?
It's a massive distortion. The financial reality is one of precarity for the vast majority. Our sources indicate that the average OnlyFans creator earns between $150 and $180 per month. Per month, totaling only around $2,000 annually. That staggering difference between the highly visible, high-earning few and the struggling masses is a key feature of the gig economy model, not just in sex work, but across all platforms.
So for most people, it is supplemental. It's a digital side hustle.
Overwhelmingly so. Over 73% of surveyed OnlyFans sex workers relied on it as a secondary source of sex work income. It provides a cushion, but it rarely replaces a primary income source, which often remains physical labor.
And this digital space isn't a separate island. It creates this massive, blurry crossover with the physical world.
The lines are completely erased. The research shows huge overlap in how creators structure their labor portfolio. Survey participants engaged in sugar arrangements, webcam modeling, escort services, and exotic dancing, all alongside their OnlyFans work.
Dancers in particular seem to use it as a highly sophisticated client management tool.
Yes, dancers will direct their strip club clients to their OnlyFans page. This secures them a monthly subscription fee, providing passive income and a retention tool. They can notify subscribers of their working days, which drives traffic to the physical club.
So it's brand extension, client retention, and passive income generation all rolled into one platform.
Exactly.
And the final irony here is the normalization effect. Because OnlyFans is so ubiquitous and often used by non-sex workers for just suggestive or slutty content, it has inadvertently chipped away at the stigma surrounding the entire sexualized labor industry.
The platformization has made aspects of sex work socially acceptable in a way that physical work never was. More people know someone or are someone who posts content online for money. And this increased visibility and normalization is forcing a public conversation about labor rights and worker autonomy in a way that was probably impossible 20 years ago.
Okay, while the corporate and digital spaces operate in the light or, the gray area, we must now confront the darkest part of this ecosystem.
The sheer brutality and immense profit generated by the illicit underground, specifically focusing on illicit massage businesses or IMBs and human trafficking.
This is exploitation hidden in plain sight, masquerading as something legitimate to shield itself from scrutiny.
And the scale is overwhelming. Estimates suggest there are over 9,000 IMBs operating across the United States.
9,000.
9,000. Collectively, these businesses generate an estimated annual gross revenue of between $2.5 billion and $2.8 billion. This is a highly industrialized criminal enterprise.
Can we break down the economics of the average IMB to understand how that massive figure is even achieved?
It's a volume-driven model. The average IMB sees about 12 customers per day. At an average transaction price of $106, the daily revenue is substantial.
Right.
And because the labor force is comprised of trafficked victims who are often kept in debt bondage or are not compensated at all, the profit margins are astronomical. The money flows fast and requires sophisticated laundering.
And the mechanism for trapping these workers, it goes far beyond simple physical restraint. It's psychological and cultural manipulation.
Precisely. The victims are predominantly Chinese or South Korean women, manipulated through layers of deception and fear. A key tactic is high levels of fraudulent debt bondage, where the victim owes impossible sums to the trafficker for travel, housing, and training.
And the traffickers exploit specific cultural norms to ensure compliance and silence.
Yes, specifically the concepts of guangxi and saving face. Guangxi is the complex system of reciprocal relationships and social obligation, which traffickers pervert to create a deep psychological indebtedness.
And saving face.
Saving face discourages victims from publicly questioning or reporting their exploiters to authorities, as doing so would bring shame and retribution not just on themselves, but potentially their families back home.
This level of criminal organization just thrives when there are regulatory voids.
Look at the situation in Ohio. The state has a major regulation void for non-medical, non-therapeutic, or relaxation massage. If you don't offer those specific categories, you aren't required to be licensed by the state medical board.
So criminals exploit that loophole.
They do. They establish IMBs that avoid state-level oversight and are far harder for local law enforcement to track and investigate.
What about states like Texas, where they have detailed regulations? Law enforcement still struggles with enforcement, right? They're looking for signs of unprofessional conduct.
Texas law is specific.
Mm-hmm.
No residency on premises, no sexual contact, and no massage and lingerie. Law enforcement is trained to look for physical evidence, condoms, sex toys, lubricant as proof of unprofessional conduct.
And what did they find?
A Houston PD analysis highlighted a significant disconnect. While they arrested people for prostitution at both strip clubs and IMBs, almost every single IMB bust resulted in prostitution arrests, compared to only some of the strip club busts.
So that suggests the IMBs were the true, dedicated fronts for prostitution, but maybe not getting the same level of investigative resources as the larger, more visible strip clubs.
Exactly. The Houston PD concluded that IMBs were historically underinvestigated. They pop up quickly, often along affluent thoroughfares, and they just blend in. The community often ignores them, which allows them to operate for extended periods.
And we have to talk about the demand side.
We do. Platforms like rubmaps.com host detailed, appalling reviews written by customers about the sexual services, payment methods, and satisfaction levels regarding women who are often victims of trafficking. It's industrial, anonymous cataloging of exploitation.
Moving to specific geographic challenges, New Orleans is nationally recognized as a hub for human sex trafficking.
It faces a severe crisis, particularly impacting vulnerable populations. Data from the Covenant House, which serves homeless youth, is just damning.
What did it show?
A Loyola University study found that 14% of interviewed homeless youth were victims of trafficking, 11% for sex trafficking, and 5% for labor trafficking. That translates conservatively to 87 Covenant House residents a year being victims. This highlights the deep connection between systemic vulnerability, homelessness, and organized exploitation.
In New Orleans, the local tension centers heavily on the concentration of strip clubs in the French Quarter. Residents and business owners argue that this density creates a blighting effect.
The sheer concentration is the problem. If the French Quarter were its own city, it would potentially have the highest per capita concentration of strip clubs in the nation. This concentration is cited as leading to an increase in crime, drug dealing, street prostitution, violence, lewd acts, which damages the neighborhood's character and business environment.
And the evidence suggests the clubs themselves were often nexus points for crime.
They were. City planning documents cited an undercover investigation in October 2015 where law enforcement found drug dealing and prostitution occurring in 9 out of the 14 strip clubs investigated.
So advocates argue the legal venues feed the illegal ones.
Anti-trafficking advocates argue that this high density, even of the legal venues, feeds the demand side that fuels the broader trafficking network in the city. The city is now trying to reverse regulations that allowed the clubs to open door-to-door, block after block.
So whether the profits come from a publicly traded adult entertainment conglomerate, a digital platform, or a clandestine IMB, once billions are generated illicitly, those funds have to be cleaned. This is where the world of financial crime comes into sharp focus.
This is the vital link. It connects the trafficker to the global financial system. The Treasury's National Money Laundering Risk Assessment identifies highly sophisticated methods used to legitimize these vast sums of money.
And virtual assets are the new frontier here, providing speed and anonymity.
They offer distance from regulators. Criminals use virtual asset service providers, or VASPs. Critically, they rely on nested VASPs.
What's a nested VAST?
Imagine a smaller, unregulated crypto company that doesn't have its own bank accounts. It uses an account with a larger, legitimate crypto company. This allows the smaller, illicit entity to nest within the larger one's compliance framework, making it incredibly hard for regulators to see the underlying source of the funds.
It's like a Russian doll of crypto companies.
That's a great way to put it. You can't see the smallest doll inside, and that's where the dirty money is. And once the money is in the virtual world, it's a constant game of movement.
Right.
They employ chain hopping, exchanging the virtual assets across multiple different blockchains, Bitcoin to Ethereum to Monero, to obscure the transaction history before finally moving the funds to foreign-located VASPs, often in Southeast Asia. The DOJ seizing $112 million linked to virtual asset confidence scams shows the magnitude of this problem.
And beyond virtual assets, traditional criminal organizations still rely on established high-volume methods.
Yes. Drug traffickers, for instance, utilize highly specialized networks like Chinese money laundering organizations or CMLOs. These organizations facilitate transnational movement of billions by using informal value transfer systems.
So non-bank systems.
Think of traditional, non-bank, cash-based remittance systems, but operating on a massive professional scale. This allows vast amounts of value to cross borders without ever triggering U.S. financial reporting requirements.
And what about human smuggling proceeds? How do they clean their cash?
They rely on amassing large quantities of cash to avoid bank reporting requirements and utilize funnel accounts across multiple institutions. Critically, they heavily invest in hard assets, property, and luxury goods. Real estate remains one of the most vulnerable sectors for money laundering because criminals can easily anonymize their identities using shell companies and legal entities.
This brings us back to the gatekeepers, the legitimate professionals who, knowingly or unknowingly, facilitate the whole process. We have to discuss the use of trust accounts.
This is a massive vulnerability. Pooled client accounts, like interest on lawyers' trust accounts or IOLTAs, are structurally perfect for anonymized money laundering.
How does that work?
An IOLTA exists for a legitimate purpose, to hold client funds in escrow. But because lawyer-client privilege is strong and the funds of hundreds of different clients are legally commingled in one account, illicit actors can deposit large sums, commingle them with legitimate funds, and move them out, all while being shielded by the lawyer's professional standing and the general lack of robust anti-money laundering reporting requirements for the legal sector.
So the lawyer, operating through a completely legitimate structure designed to handle client funds, becomes an unwitting or sometimes witting conduit for the world's most toxic money.
That is the tragic reality. It shows how the proceeds of human exploitation seamlessly flow into the financial world, protected by the very mechanisms designed to protect legitimate commerce and privacy.
Given the sheer scale of the challenges, from corporate exploitation to transnational trafficking, local governments are constantly attempting to assert control over sexually oriented businesses, or SOBs, primarily through zoning.
Right. And the legal hurdle for any city attempting to regulate an SOB is high, since the First Amendment protects expression. So they have to prove one thing.
Which is?
They must prove that their primary concern is preventing harmful secondary impacts. These are the tangible negative effects the business brings to the surrounding community: increased crime, blight, traffic congestion, and lowered property values.
And they don't even have to conduct their own studies to prove that, which is a key advantage for smaller towns.
Correct. The Supreme Court has ruled that local governments can rely on studies of secondary impacts conducted by other jurisdictions. This provision is vital because it allows cities to justify extensive restrictions based on empirical data collected elsewhere, saving massive amounts of money and time.
But the regulations have to be very specific.
They have to be clear-cut, narrowly tailored, and constitutional. Dallas zoning laws offer a fascinating example of just how minute these local regulations can be for all types of businesses.
What do you mean?
Dallas regulates everything in meticulous detail. We're talking specific setbacks for gas drilling, rules for the placement of temporary cellular units, even restrictions on accessory outside sales. When a city maintains that level of micromanagement over all commercial uses, the regulation of SOBs must also be precise.
And New Orleans is now considering these kinds of reforms, right?
Yes. Facing the devastating impact of its concentrated French Quarter district, they've considered major reforms, including implementing spacing requirements or a conditional use process to prevent that door-to-door concentration that fostered the blight.
Let's look at a different regulatory model entirely. The UK uses a licensing framework, which seems to give local authorities even more powerful veto rights than U.S. zoning.
In England and Wales, sexual entertainment venues are regulated through a mandatory licensing scheme. The key difference is that licensing decisions are often based on local character and nuisance, which means initial planning permission can be effectively overruled if the local area changes.
So if a neighborhood becomes more residential.
Exactly. Even if the specific venue hasn't generated any complaints or nuisance, the license can be revoked.
That sounds like a powerful NIMBY effect. Not in my backyard.
It absolutely empowers neighborhood opposition. The precautionary logic allows local councils to push SEVs out of highly valued central commercial areas into marginalized spaces, simply because the potential for nuisance conflicts with the newly perceived character of the neighborhood. This often results in the businesses feeling unjustly targeted.
The UK also has much stricter conduct laws within the venues, doesn't it?
Significantly stricter. British licensing laws often prohibit any physical contact between dancers and customers. They frequently enforce a strict 3-foot rule to ensure a non-contact environment, which is a marked contrast to many U.S. clubs where private, high-contact dances are the norm.
This friction between regulation and reality leads us back to the workers and the crucial ongoing debate over decriminalization.
The current regulatory patchwork ensures that sex workers, whether in legal clubs or legal IMBs, often feel too stigmatized and criminalized to seek justice. The stigma prevents them from reporting crimes, non-payment by a client, assault, even racial discrimination by a strip club owner out of a deep-seated fear of being arrested themselves or further targeted.
In New Orleans, the focus of advocates was simple. Get dancers classified as employees, not contractors.
That is the single most powerful regulatory tool available. Advocates petitioned for dancers to be hired as regular employees under the Federal Labor Standards Act. This shift would mandate fundamental labor protections, standard benefits, protection from sexual harassment, minimum wage, and the requirement for the club to provide a safe, crime-free environment.
It forces the corporation to finally assume the labor risk it currently avoids.
It does.
And this feeds into the larger human rights argument that international organizations and sex worker advocacy groups have been pushing for: full decriminalization.
The argument is that moving sex work entirely out of the criminal realm allows workers to exercise basic socioeconomic rights that are currently denied: access to housing, bank accounts, healthcare, and the ability to report violence against them without fear of arrest. By focusing on human rights and labor protection, the system stops treating sex workers as criminals or helpless victims and starts treating them as workers, which is the most effective way to minimize violence and exploitation, particularly in vulnerable environments like IMBs.
We have spent this deep dive tracking the money and the labor across this vast, complex spectrum. We moved from the high-margin, publicly traded corporate environment of RCI, which leverages the independent contractor loophole to maximize profits,
Through the precarious digital gig economy of OnlyFans, where most creators earn little but do gain agency.
and finally into the devastating, multi-billion-dollar underworld of IMBs and human trafficking.
The essential, undeniable tension running through all of this is the corporate drive for profit, which thrives on regulatory ambiguity. Whether it's the independent contractor status or the state-level failure to regulate non-medical massage, the ambiguity shifts risk onto the most vulnerable. It forces the worker to pay the price for the corporation's efficiency or for the criminal organization's immense profits.
We've seen how those profits, the proceeds of exploitation, fraud, and trafficking, must be cleaned. They flow through sophisticated financial mechanisms like nested VASPs, chain hopping, and the highly vulnerable system of real estate and pooled legal trust accounts like IOLTAs.
And this is where the system of accountability just breaks down. We know the money trails lead directly through seemingly legitimate gatekeepers: the financial institutions, the virtual asset providers, the real estate firms, and, critically, the law firms. We mentioned how proceeds from major fraud schemes were laundered through a global law firm's trust account. Lawyers are largely self-regulated by state bar associations, insulated from the robust anti-money laundering compliance standards imposed on banks.
So if the most effective strategy for combating the darkest elements of this industry is relentlessly following the money trail, and those trails are often protected by privilege and regulatory gaps that benefit the most powerful, legitimate-looking institutions.
The final necessary question we leave you with is this: if the professionals and the systems designed to safeguard legitimacy are the most effective conduits for organized crime, how do you hold those powerful gatekeepers truly accountable when the line between legitimate enterprise and criminal finance is not just blurred, but actively and deliberately erased?